In October of 2024, the One Piece anime did something it had literally never done since it first started airing 25 years ago. It went on a break. From the start of the anime in 1999 all the way up to last year, there had never been a single month without a new episode of One Piece coming out. But this historic run finally came to an end with the anime taking a whopping half a year break in October, where it is only now returning this month. What you may not be aware of though, is that in these 6 months without the anime, One Piece went from the most viral series on the planet to its biggest ever drop in popularity. To explain why the series suffered this kind of a historic slump, I first need to tell you just how popular One Piece had become in this decade, and the role the anime played in this success, but also why the anime now finally being back is far more important than you realize. Even though One Piece has been an extremely popular story since the manga first started in 1997, the franchise actually only hit its peak very recently in the 2020s. This was arguably due to 5 massive events that all happened in these decades one after the other, that made One Piece go from just the most popular series in Japan to the most popular story in the entire world. The first of these 5 events happened in the year 2020, when the pandemic started and people across the globe were suddenly forced to stay inside. This actually led to a huge increase in people binge-watching long television series from their homes, as a lot of other forms of entertainment, like going to the cinema, restaurants or bars with friends, was no longer possible. Surprisingly, because the lockdown lasted for a lot longer than many expected, the one show in particular that really started gaining traction was the over 1000 episode long Japanese animated series about pirates. This also wasn't just among other anime, but One Piece started becoming globally even more watched than many of the biggest Western dramas or live action series. This was however only the first step in One Piece's huge 2020 surge, and it was about to be followed by something that would change the series forever. In 2022, the One Piece manga released its 1044th chapter, the chapter where Luffy for the first time transformed into Gear 5th. The chapter immediately became the biggest chapter in the manga's history, creating a spike in interest that had never been seen before even in the manga's biggest arcs. Gear 5 was essentially One Piece's very own Super Saiyan moment, where this chapter broke the internet and created the biggest viral moment the series had ever had. Gear 5th Luffy was suddenly absolutely everywhere, and became the new mascot of the entire franchise, and no other chapter in the series has ever come close to exploding the franchise into the mainstream like chapter 1044 did. On the back of the Gear 5th reveal, One Piece in 2022 became the #1 most watched show in the world. However, this wasn't just due to the huge jump in popularity created by Gear 5th, but there was another event later that same year that exploded One Piece to even greater heights. In August of 2022, One Piece Film Red hit theaters, and even though it seemed impossible, in just a few months, the series peak created by Gear 5 was surpassed. Film Red became the highest grossing One Piece film of all time by a huge margin, and when it was still airing, became the 5th highest grossing Japanese film of all time. The reason why Film Red was so huge was likely helped by how big One Piece itself had already become in the 2020s, and the movie made sure to play into the Gear 5 hype. But I think the movie's success was also very likely because it was centered on Shanks. Shanks is essentially one of the most iconic characters in all of One Piece, and because he's been there since chapter 1, practically everyone who knows about One Piece knows about Shanks, and wants to see more of him. So making him the focus of the film's marketing was clearly a very smart move. On top of this, the film's main villain, Uta, was a singer whose songs were performed by the hugely popular real-life J-pop star, Ado, which once again likely helped expand One Piece's popularity to people who'd never been interested in the series before. With both Gear 5 and Film Red happening in the same year, and this also being the year when One Piece became the most globally watched show, it pretty much looked like One Piece could never surpass the heights it reached in 2022. However, it literally did just that in the very next year. In fall of 2023, One Piece reached its current peak popularity, far surpassing that of even Film Red. But this time around, the peak was created by 2 separate events that happened at the same time. The first was that the anime finally released the episode where Luffy went Gear 5th, which was monumental. If you for example look up anime clips of Luffy fighting Kaido in Gear 5th, Many of them are essentially their own viral videos with millions of views, and are some of the most viewed One Piece videos of all time. Still, Gear 15 the anime was just one of two huge events that happened here, and the other big thing that went down in the fall of 2023 was the release of Netflix's One Piece live action. Despite anime the live action adaptations having a long record of being failures, somehow One Piece live action turned out to be a massive success. Actually, that's putting it mildly, where the show essentially became the most popular anime live-action adaptation of all time, as well as one of the most popular Netflix series ever. The show got immediately booked for a second season, and from what I remember, got so many people who'd never even watched anime interested in the series. While Gear 5 and Film Red were huge moments, this really was the big thing that pushed One Piece into the mainstream in a way no other anime had really ever done before. From 2022 to 2023, One Piece was really the franchise that could do no wrong. Through the pandemic, Gear 5, Film Red, and finally One Piece live action, the series only kept on breaking its own incredibly high milestones and becoming an even bigger media juggernaut. What I haven't focused on yet though, and this really to me is the actual topic of this video, is how the One Piece manga and the One Piece anime took full advantage of this new boom in the series' popularity. Rather than letting the momentum created by Gear 5 and the climax of the Wano arc just die, the One Piece manga instead decided to further escalate this recent fan excitement in the following Egghead arc. And how it did this was by finally giving the fans what they want. The One Piece story has dozens of very iconic characters whom the story has been building up for years or even decades, and in Egghead, the manga finally started to use some of these characters, and fast. In almost every month when this arc was going on, characters the fans had been waiting on for years were finally for the first time seen in action. The story was no longer just following the Straw Hats, but showing massive events across the world, where we for the first time saw decades built up characters like Shanks and Garp getting genuine fights, and this was at some points happening at a weekly pace. The manga was however just one half of this equation, and the anime also played a huge role in making these moments in the story hit. It was not that many years ago that the One Piece anime had an incredibly bad reputation for its quality, with a lot of fans treating it as a joke. But this all changed in the last few years. Around the time the Wano arc started, whenever there is actually a significant event in the One Piece story, Toei Animation has put some of the most talented people in the industry in charge of adapting these moments into the anime. This has created a very effective synergy between the One Piece manga and the One Piece anime, where the manga consistently produces huge events involving iconic characters, and the anime adapts these moments with movie-level quality. The end result of this is that the One Piece anime in this current era has been able to consistently go viral episode after episode, which was something completely unheard of in the last decade. Earlier in this video, I mentioned how the episode where Luffy went Gear 5 for the first time created viral video clips with millions of views, but what I didn't yet reveal was that this is something the anime has consistently been able to do over and over again, even after Gear 5. The Egghead arc alone in the anime has at this point created dozens of viral moments, where many of them actually rival or even surpass those Gear 5 clips in terms of views on YouTube. This is very likely all done on purpose, and what Toei is essentially doing is taking full advantage of the One Piece fanbase. One Piece has a lot of fans who've once upon a time watched or read the story, but are not actively following it. They're still interested in the story, but just not enough to keep up to date with it. When a fan like this sees something like a clip of Shanks for the first time ever fighting in the story, and it's actually extremely well animated, they will not only watch and like that video, they will start heavily considering getting back into the anime and manga. Because of this, the One Piece anime is no longer just an adaptation of the manga, it's a huge marketing engine for the whole franchise. As it stands, One Piece's huge rise in popularity this decade is basically a perfect storm. It's had a ton of big breaks, like its very own Super Saiyan moment, or the first truly successful anime to live action adaptation, and these have created a wave that both the manga and anime have taken full advantage of. However, all good things must come to an end. And as I mentioned back in the intro, this video is not just about how One Piece became so popular, but how it ultimately lost much of this popularity. If 2023 was the peak of the franchise, 2024 could be seen as when this popularity finally started going down. And the biggest thing that caused this was what I mentioned at the very start of this video. The One Piece anime's first true hiatus. Up until fall of 2024, the One Piece franchise was still going incredibly strong, where the manga had presented huge moments like Kuma's backstory or Luffy fighting the Five Elders. And the anime kept pace with its quality adaptation of the Egghead arc's first half. Then, very unexpectedly, the One Piece anime announced that it was going on a 6-month break, and that fans would only get to see the anime version of Egghead's second half in April of 2025. The effects of this announcement weren't immediately apparent, but in just the first few months without the anime, One Piece's massive popularity all of a sudden started to decrease. 3 months into the anime break, One Piece's popularity had plummeted to numbers not seen since the beginning of the pandemic, a time before any of the huge viral moments discussed in this video had happened. I personally only really noticed this drop in One Piece's popularity when looking at the success of my own videos, where no matter what I did, they just did not seem to get the same amount of views as before. While I first thought that maybe my newer videos just sucked, and hey, maybe that's still true, I quickly realized it wasn't just me, and virtually all One Piece YouTube channels were going through the same effect and experiencing historically low numbers. If you're at all familiar with One Piece YouTube, chances are your favorite creator got the lowest amount of views they'd had in years after the One Piece anime went on this hiatus in late 2024. Now, granted, this decline in One Piece's popularity isn't entirely due to the anime, but it's also partly because of the manga. Eiichiro Oda had to take several surprise breaks coincidentally right after the anime went on break, leading to a period where fans for the first time ever had to deal with not getting new One Piece episodes, but also getting a record low number of new manga chapters. What chapters were also released in this 6-month period when the anime has been on break have also not exactly been viral moments, where the current Elbaf arc has mainly focused on telling the story through new characters, rather than using fan favorites that drive up popularity like the Wano and Egghead arcs did. Likewise, the Elbaf arc has arguably taken things slower than Egghead, where the manga has mainly focused on the Straw Hats slowly exploring this new island, which is pretty different from Egghead, which immediately started with huge fights and world-shaking events. So yeah, this current downturn in One Piece's popularity isn't just due to the anime, but it is arguably still the biggest reason. It simply cannot be understated how big of a role the anime currently plays in the popularity of One Piece as a whole. It is essentially the lifeblood of the whole franchise, where the anime reaches a far larger audience than the manga ever could. Even in fall of 2024, where it had been over a year since One Piece live action was released, and the manga was relatively quiet, the anime was still the engine that kept the franchise viral, where the very same month the anime went on break, they released yet another big viral episode, with the climax of the battle between Garp and Kusan, which, as hard as it may be to believe, got comparable views to Luffy's Gear 5th scenes on YouTube. Basically, the anime going on this half-a-year hiatus wasn't a big deal just because it was the longest period ever without a new One Piece episode. It was also a big deal because the franchise no longer had the anime marketing it. In retrospect, it makes perfect sense that this slump in One Piece's popularity happened right after the anime hiatus, where it finally put a stop to the huge wave the series had gotten in the beginning of the decade. However, now that the anime is finally back, I think things are about to change real quick. As I'm recording this video, the One Piece anime has finally come back on this very day, and is finally continuing its adaptation of the Egghead arc. I think this is a good moment for me to reveal why the anime even went on this break in the first place. According to Toei, the reason for the break was not just to give their team a vacation or something like that, but it was done to both maintain and improve the quality of the anime. I do not think this is a decision they made lightly, and they likely knew the effects a break like this would have on the franchise. I think the reason why they still went along with this was very simply that they want to keep doing what they've been doing, where Toei wants to keep adapting the manga's big moments into viral episodes with movie quality animation. At this point, the results simply speak for themselves, and this is likely how they will keep marketing One Piece in the future. It's also not hard to believe why they needed a break like this, and honestly, it's far more unexpected that they managed to make the Wano and Egghead arcs big moments as good as they were, while still making episodes at a weekly schedule. Because we already know what material the second half of the Egghead anime is going to cover, I think we can also predict some of the huge moments that Toei has spent all these months refining. The second half of the Egghead arc is going to cover moments like Kuma's backstory and the God Valley incident, which are certainly huge. But what I think is far more important is that the anime is going to finally adapt Luffy's fights against Kizaru and the Five Elders. This should be massive. Gear 5th Luffy's action scenes have consistently been the anime's biggest moments up till now, where even something like Luffy's fight against Lucci reached 8-digit views on YouTube. I've already talked a lot about the effect using iconic One Piece characters has on popularity, and Kizaru and the Elders definitely fit this category. They're once again characters virtually all fans know about, and seeing them in action after all these years is basically guaranteed viral content. The second half of Egghead is also to date the longest period we've had Luffy fighting in Gear 5th in the manga, meaning that the opportunity for Toei to create said viral moments could at some points be at an almost weekly pace. Really, as long as Toei is able to maintain their quality from the past few years, the return of the anime should by all logic create another huge wave for the franchise, easily returning the series to the popularity it enjoyed when the anime was still airing. I however still have one more conspiracy theory left for this video. If you're a One Piece fan who mainly cares about the manga, which to be fair is my core audience, I think you should still be interested in the return of the anime. At the end of the day, Oda is not just a great storyteller, but he's clearly someone who also understands marketing. At many points during One Piece's serialization, Oda has timed major events in the manga with the One Piece anime, movies and other major events to make the franchise as a whole more popular. I, for example, do not think it is a coincidence that Shanks showed up in Wano right around the time Film Red was released. Arguably, this same thing even happened in the most recent chapter, where Oda commemorated the return of the anime with a special cover spread, basically nudging fans to go watch the new episodes. The reason why the manga may have been a bit quiet in the last few months, and why, unlike in Egghead, we've yet to see what is going on in the One Piece world outside Elbaf, could be because Oda is saving these big moments for a time when the anime finally returns. It's just an idea, but it could very well be that the return of the One Piece anime will coincide with huge events suddenly starting to occur in the manga, and we might finally start to see more big events across the world just like in Egghead. Even if that doesn't happen though, the return of the anime will undoubtedly create a huge boost for One Piece's popularity, and I'm pretty sure this is once again just the first of many big events to come. It's currently looking very likely that both the One Piece live-action Season 2 and the One Piece anime remake are both going to be released within a year, and there's also rumors of a new One Piece movie being in production. If all these succeed, I think we're very soon looking at another mainstream explosion of interest in One Piece, like the one we got in the first half of the decade, and this 6-month drought without much new exciting content coming out was more than likely just a temporary slump. Then again, I also wouldn't be surprised if the One Piece anime will need more breaks like this in the future, and that the series could slowly become more and more seasonal. While this should increase the quality of the anime, I'd be lying if I said these kinds of breaks wouldn't take a bite out of my own views. This is why I'm resorting to desperate measures, and I'm going to plunder all my current views for what they are worth. Here be the names of the hapless civilians who I've pillaged: Mardiana Tanita, Thomas Johnson, Joshua Ann, and watching Higurashi at 12 gave me psychosis. You'll soon be joining them, because you'll also be joining the membership feature of this channel, says I. Now that cringe is out of the way, a genuine thank you to all my current members, and you too should definitely join, because you get access to a bunch of great features like members only videos by doing so. Thanks a lot for watching this video to the end.